Thanks so much for joining me again for another episode of the Chris Endry podcast, especially if you're joining fresh off of last week's episode on eugenics in America. That was a darker one. It was hard for me even to edit. Well done if you did manage to listen to the end. And also thank you to my patrons. I put up a brief history of Australia's eugenics on the Patreon page. And that was thankfully less depressing, but probably just because it's shorter. Still shocking how recent all that stuff is. Anyway, we're past that today and onto hopefully some more happy topics, because I put the call out asking for topics, and one of the winners, tied equal first at the moment, is the major lessons from my first years with kids. So before we go into it, I just want to give a disclaimer once so I don't have to say it before everything that I say today. I'm not proclaiming to be a parenting expert. I would be wary of taking advice of anyone on parenting, really, given how specific it is, circumstance to circumstance, person to person. I'm also only new to the game. My eldest son, Mihai, is 2.5, and my daughter, Phoenix, is 11 months. And I'm not looking in this episode to give parenting advice or life advice about having kids or whatever. Sorry if I do fall into that. My intention is, like with so many of these episodes, just share what my thoughts are on a topic in the hope that they'll resonate with your own ideas and get to have a bit of a mental dialogue around what I hope are some interesting corners of what is a very interesting part of life. And hopefully that offers something useful in the quiet space in between us. I do want to say the pivot to doing just podcasts from performing all the time. If you only listen to me here, you might not know, but up until COVID, I would perform 3 or 4 times a week on average for many, many years. And it's so unsatisfying how easy it is to reach a large number of people via podcasting, but not getting any of that feedback that you normally get when you're performing to audiences and you see their faces and you feel how a room is. And it's just a whole different game. I like doing it because it gives a whole kind of other access where you're not as guided by the audience. But I miss seeing faces in response to the conversations and having the dialogue much closer to hand. So thank you to those of you who do reach out after each episode. I love to hear any of your thoughts. And as always, if you like any of these episodes, please do feel free to share them with friends. The Patreon audience continues to grow. I'm welcoming this week Ruben Ingle, who's joined as a casual. Thank you so much. And thrilled to have Sam Dawkins sign up as a VIP. He's promised to stay at that tier to the end of time. So thank you, Sam. So glorious to have you all here. Let's take a quick spin of this music that I produced myself, and then we'll get stuck in. Okay, geez, that sounded good. Major lessons from the first couple of years of parenting. I only have a couple of years to go on. And yes, even though I gave that disclaimer at the start and I said I didn't want to apologize the whole episode, I still am going to say that obviously parenting toddlers and babies is fundamentally different from what that experience will be like in even 1 year, let alone 10, 20, 30. So I guess probably mostly what I'm going to be talking about today is a series of reflections that come from that transition point where you go from not being a parent and living your own life broadly autonomously, or at least relatively autonomously, to having people that are completely dependent upon you for survival, and the shifts that causes. And it's recent enough that I didn't have kids that I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on those transitions have been. And whilst I'm not a child psychologist or social scientist or whatever you might want to be to authoritatively speak about this stuff, I do spend almost all my time doing it. I clocked in some 16 hours of parenting just yesterday. So it is by far and away the thing I spend most of my time doing. And so I hope that I at least have some relevant or useful reflections from the front line of being arms deep in the task of it. And the first thing that just comes to mind is something I've talked about in the podcast before, is that I had no idea at all how great it would be. And I kind of resent everybody in my life, really, for not telling me earlier, because I would have had kids 20 years ago if I had known how great it was going to be. And that would have been a huge mistake, I should openly acknowledge. But I can count on one hand, I can count on 2 fingers. I remember the people that recommended that I have kids. And I'm kind of shocked that it wasn't more. And I understand there's a social sensitivity around not everybody can have kids. You don't want to tell people how to live their lives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But, not everyone can go to Disneyland. Doesn't mean I wouldn't put pictures up on Instagram about what a great time I would have at Disneyland. That's a bad example because all people with kids do is put up pictures of their kids on Instagram. But you get my point. There's rightfully a taboo about intervening in other people's lives generally, especially around sensitive things like having kids. But I'm still surprised that the closest people in my life weren't more vocal about it. And I'm hoping to be a counterbalance for that, at least in this podcast, by saying that it is just so astonishingly rewarding. The joy that I get to experience from the tiniest things every single day is unparalleled by basically everything I did in all of my 37 years or whatever prior. And I have had a really great time. I've prioritized having a great time. I've only done things that I like. And I think I've gotten pretty good at cultivating more of them. And yet nothing has compared. I mean, every single day, there'll be one small moment where I'm struck. I'm like, oh, this is as good as I've felt about anything ever. Now, I had no sense of that beforehand. Lily and I would idly come around to the idea of having kids, but we hadn't mapped out our lives or aggressively planned it. In fact, we found out that we were going to have a baby, and then a week later, it continued our scheduled move to California, where we were intending to be for a while. So this is no rite of passage or assumption or anything. And before doing it, I remember thinking that it would be hard, but probably ultimately worthwhile, that it would be an interesting thing to do over the arc of time. But I also had these ideas that so many people have before doing anything that's difficult, which is I'm not ready to do it. I'm not the right person to do it. It's a risky thing to do if you don't do it properly. And all of those things are true, but those things are true about a lot of things that we undertake anyway. And it's one thing to do with your own lives, but then to do it with other lives is a bigger question. It only says things about me, I guess. But my main fear before having kids was that I would find it really boring, that I would get bored really easily, and that from the outside, what looks like a monotonous life would be too much for me to deal with. And luckily for me, it's kind of the exact opposite, because I guess whilst aesthetically my days are the same, you know, I live within a 500-meter radius on foot most of the time. I do the same type of tasks. If you were a spy assigned to keep track of all my movements, you might think I was doing exactly the same thing every day. But because the development, particularly early on, is so dynamic and quick of babies and then toddlers, every day is kind of fundamentally different. And while sometimes time can drag when you're slowed down to the speed of children, the thrill and dynamism of it is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum to what I would have expected. And also, I guess my fears around the idea of becoming a parent surrounded how much of our cultural discourse about parenting is dedicated to how hard it is, and how, because that transition is so heavy for many people, how the pain of how occupying it is, and to the exclusion of everything else in many instances, is a real factor to people not enjoying it. And I hold no judgment for people who aren't enjoying it. It makes sense. It's exhausting. It takes all your time, cognitive effort, and you really do have to turn off the burners of basically everything else that you're doing. But at the start, I understand that changes pretty quickly, but it doesn't feel quick when it's a few years, especially if you have a few. It could be 5-6 years that you're sort of out of your professional identity, your physical capacities, your cognitive powers because you're sleep deprived, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The hardships are real. But what surprised me about it is how every time I feel like I'm completely on the edge, I never really have honestly felt that it was all beyond me in any way, which is saying something, because, you know, you only need a couple of complications added into the mix and it really is a 28-hour-a-day job or a 150% energy job where you have 20% of your regular energy. But there's something about being, you know, people talk about being in the trenches and that sort of stuff. But I think I'm also constitutionally lucky in that I'm very optimistic. So even when things are bad or the situations are mechanically overwhelming, I kind of just feel delighted to be alive and feel the privilege of it all. And I understand that's not everyone, but that's just me and how I felt about it. And I hope that that's, if this is something you're considering doing or not doing, I hope that it's soothing to hear this stuff, particularly that one that you hear a lot, which is I'm not ready to do this yet. I mean, there are some things in life that you're never ready to do until you're doing them. There are ducks that you can line up to make your life easier, to get things in order. But I think that we think of those as being having enough money, being mature enough, and those things are for sure factors. But maybe the biggest one is who you are as a person when you intersect with becoming a parent. Because what I have noticed from myself and my peers and people that are way ahead of me in the journey or behind, and how they interact with even thinking about it, is that, like so many things in life, the most painful part comes from a misaligned expectation. So that can cut in a couple of ways. If you, your whole life, see yourself as becoming a particular type of mother or father, and then it happens and it's not all magical journeys to the mum shop or sitting around in a circle laughing at our cherubs or whatever it is. Like, that's going to be painful. And then on the other end, if you expect that you can sort of be detached and still get a whole lot done in your professional life and maintain 100 social plates spinning and whatever and still get the full reward out of the experience, you're going to be disappointed there too. I mean, even just down to the basic level, the volatility of what babies especially can be means if you're expecting to do something in a given day, and sometimes it literally is, 1 5-minute task. If you expect to do that in a day and you hold your self-value or hold your happiness to being able to do that, you're in big trouble, because it's, as I keep saying, it's an all-encompassing thing and you need to be flexible. And just holding on to knowing or needing or control or certainty is such a unhelpful path. It's kind of an impossible option. My friend Dan gave me some really good advice early on. His kids are 11, 13 or something like that. He said, whenever things are going really badly and there's a tough behavior or a tough period or whatever, don't worry, it'll pass. And whenever things are going really well, don't worry, that'll pass. And, that's just general great advice for life anyway, but it does seem to be super true. Something might be beyond the point exhausting, and then literally the next day it'll never happen ever again, and you just can't control or predict it. And it's kind of a grand exercise in submitting in a way to experience, because when you're in the adult world and you understand things and you have agency and you've got cognitive power and you've got resources and whatever, you know how to move in the world, that might make you think that you're in charge of the situation, but you're really not. Like, it was weird to me how, and I'm sorry to use this word, but kind of how like magical babies are, in that they know everything about what they need at a particular time and how to do what they've got to do. And you don't know anything. And you've got to listen at least and react to that. So yes, it's just an experience of having no control over something which you're extremely invested in and is going to be for you probably, hopefully, the most important thing that you're doing at the time, which I think is a good transferable life lesson to have escalated it. The other side of that is, if you are able to arrange your life so that you can maximize your flexibility with how you have to spend your time at given moments, to allow you to take the loss of, everything that I'm wearing has just been vomited on. It's going to take me 20 minutes to get ready, or I'm not going to get any sleep at all tonight. I probably can't go to 6 a.m. yoga tomorrow, or whatever it is. If you can have that sort of anti-fragility, flexibility, there are just so many dividends to reap, because every small moment can be so satisfying. And the more you put into it, like everything, the more you get out of it. And the satisfaction that you can share with your kids. And again, like I'm at the age where Mihai's, we can have a conversation, but it's not like we're talking about deep hopes for the future or whatever. Like we're talking about what we saw the cat do, and it's still the most satisfying thing that I've ever experienced. So I'm in awe of people that have gotten to do this for decades already. And as I said, a lot of how that experience has been for me has been a product of the circumstance and who I am at the time in which I've intersected with it. I'm very aware of that and very grateful for the privileges that have me in a position where I can be flexible and do that. I'm constantly aware of it. But a lot of those privileges are ones that we forego because of our prioritization of how we think life has to be, because they do weigh so importantly in your life. It's very easy to think that you need to make particular sacrifices for your kids. And that could come in any number of forms. It could come in thinking that you need to spend all your time with them, or that you need to have a huge amount of resources for them, or that you need to be working to constantly educate them and upskill them. Like whatever it is, there's any number of levers that you could tip too low or too high on. But the main ones that I've personally noticed is that it's kind of just an amplifying of the existing struggles that you might have. And because the consequences are borne out across more people, your entire family unit, the feedback comes in quicker and you have to be more sensitive to make adjustments quickly. So for me, I like to calibrate things towards being as present as possible, because it's something that I struggle with. It's very tempting for me to get lost in rabbit holes and to focus on other things, and things that I can do to maximize that, the things that are going to make me happier and turning up and better doing it. But for other people, it'll be like, maybe you're lazy at doing tasks. Well, there's a billion tasks you now have to do, so get good at doing that quickly. Or maybe you like to be available for everybody else, but that's no longer possible. I mean, whatever it is. People talk about like a nuclear bomb going off in their life, in the trenches again. They use that type of language around having kids. And I think it's because the radical responsibility that it demands of you just constantly puts a stress test on everything else in your life. And I kind of knew that would be the case, but I didn't realize how haptic that feedback would be in terms of needing to solve problems on the run while being on the edge kind of all the time. And I don't mean on the edge like really anxious and stressed and upset. I just mean like, normally if you're going to have a big important conversation, you don't do it after having 2 hours sleep with a million tasks hanging over your head. Normally you can sort of create a bit of clear air. But, uh, certainly with newborns, and again, certainly if something goes wrong, you have an extra couple spanners in the works. That pressure's so extreme, and you have to adjust to it quickly. Another element that I found really interesting that I didn't expect is how confronting it can be to live a childhood from the perspective as an adult, because you've got a front row seat and you're a big part of it, and how inevitably it throws back questions to your own childhood and the things that you experienced in your own family environment and dynamic. It's going to be different from person to person, obviously, but I found it really confronting at times and almost overwhelming to think about what my own circumstances would have been at their age. And it's really nice because it's a window to critically re-examine the lines that I've felt in my own life of what's been constructive or destructive, and to kind of offer forward perspectives and deeds to help someone that you care about more than anything be better equipped to navigate life and the world. And it's also been for me an experience that, because it's an experience that's nearly identical to ones my parents would have gone through in some senses, it's given me a lot of perspective and empathy in a sort of way that's healing in understanding them as people, because there's a whole dimension of their life that I hadn't experienced now and have a first-hand thing to compare it to. Another big lesson, which is kind of one that I'm embarrassed to say because it's to do with my personal perspectives of the world, I had to invert 180 degrees in what I thought about this, but the role of a mother and a father for a kid, especially for a baby, are so totally different. And I feel silly for saying it. I guess it's painfully obvious, but I grew up with a single mum mostly, and consequently, I just thought that parental figures, you only really need one and they could be interchangeable. But that's not the case at all. I can't imagine doing this on my own. I think I have huge respect for the people that are in situations where they have to. I think you would just have to radically recruit support from everything else in your life, because there is so much constantly to do and so many specific needs that come from the kids that are different. Like neither Lily nor I are mapped in traditional gender roles in our house at all, but it is very clear what the kids will come to me or to her for at great frequencies, which is something that surprised me. Do with that what you will. Like all of this, one person's observations. Me being me, I couldn't go a full episode without making radical remarks about how society's changed or is changing or whatever. And in parenting, how we raise kids, how we have kids, whether we have kids, I think that this is one of the most important realms in which changes to society are being borne out to the suffering and to the benefit of people involved. Firstly, the expectation of whether or not you have kids is something that I never felt even 1% of it from my family, even though I said that I wish that people would have encouraged me to do it. That's not the same as being expected to do it. And we live in a society now where obviously birth rates are declining massively across much of the world. And there's not the same social expectation that having kids is a rite of passage that everybody must engage in. And I think broadly that's great. It means that perhaps compared to the past, you've got a different ratio of intentionality for people who are doing the parenting. And obviously we're also doing it much later, much later. There's a guy from my football team back at ANU, and his son was born 5 days before mine, and he is 18 years younger than me, which means that by the time he's my age, he will have an adult child, which is, I mean, fantastic. But it's a crazy big difference for two people that are standing next to each other with that age gap to be in the same life raft. But, more people are doing it closer to my age and fewer people are doing it closer to his age, which has costs and benefits. But one of the big ones, I think, is that people have had the chance to at least sort a few more things out in their life before having kids. And I don't mean because older people are more together than younger people. That may be true across a cohort, but one-to-one, I wouldn't predict that necessarily. But just more that you've had the chance to have great and terrible things happen to you and learn a little bit about how you respond in those situations, and have the chance to do the personal development to hopefully improve the way in which you respond in those situations. Because as I said, they'll get stress tested to the max at different points. And the way in which you do respond to hardship is going to be instrumental in equipping your kids for how they will respond to hardship in the world. So, you really do, as much as possible, want to have done something. I think it's better to be entering that situation prepared on that front, at least, rather than learning everything on the fly. One of the downsides of that, though, that I feel is that I didn't get to share all the fun stuff that I did in my 20s and most of my 30s with my kids. I think that they would have loved heaps of things that I did, and there's no way to sort of communicate the feeling of those in retrospect. And also, actually, It's physically hard to do. It doesn't help that we live at the top of a hill, at the top of a driveway, at the top of 3 flights of stairs and have a dog. There's a lot of physical fitness involved in having these kids. But even still, just sort of day-to-day playing with them, lugging them around, that changes as they grow up a bit, obviously. But I regularly feel grateful that I'm in good physical shape because I think it's the type of thing that the average Australian man my age might not have as good a time with, the sort of general war on your back and joints and everything else. Yeah. Maybe that's saying too much, but obviously people are generally in better physical shape in their 20s than they are in their 40s. It's a small, stupid thing, but one of my biggest regrets of having the kids a bit later is that unlike many of my friends who are able to play football and basketball with their kids, I think I'll be past all of that by the time they're of an age where that would be interesting to them. Maybe not. Maybe all this anti-aging stuff that's coming in will kick right in and I'll have the knees of an 18-year-old. Not that will help because I sure sucked at football when I was 18. But your physical health is something that's really important and obviously changes as you age. And I think that will mechanically change how people have kids as we have them later. We're also having way fewer kids than certainly a century ago. And they're all living, which is great and certainly wasn't the case a century, 2 centuries ago. The experience of having more than one has been really interesting because the first one, I guess like you do anything. When you start playing guitar, for example, you hurt your fingers because you're pressing too hard. You don't know how to find the right margins. You have to think really hard about each position. But then as you get to do it, it becomes automatic and it doesn't hurt and becomes comfortable and instinctive. It's the same times 10 million with parenting. All the things that were really hard the first time, I don't even notice doing the second time. I thought it would be really hard and disgusting to have to change nappies all the time. But, a month, like that's not even in the top 2,000 things that's difficult or annoying about having kids. It becomes as routine as going to the bathroom yourself, which is not something you consciously think about too much. Hope you're okay there. And so the second time going around doing all the same thing, there are new challenges because you have more capacity, but that just means that you find new things to want to improve on. And I just can't imagine what it would be like by the time you get to 5 or 6. I wish that I could do it. I probably left the run a little bit too late. But you would think that having 2 kids would be twice as hard. In some ways, it can be. In many ways, I found it easier than having just one. Firstly, because you've got all the skills from the first time going around. Secondly, they've got each other to interact with. There's way more dynamics. It's very hard for a baby to be bored when there's a toddler running around. It's very hard for you to be bored when there's a toddler running around and a baby. So that makes everything just a bit more fun and magical. And you get the dynamic of, seeing these mini versions of you and your partner, but spliced up different ways. So you get more of a sense of what stuff is all baby stuff and what stuff is specific to them stuff. And that's really, really fun. I would love to, just keep rolling those dice to see what iterations you get and what personalities emerge, because you can't know and you get to enjoy it. Another big and obvious one that I talk about a bit in the podcast is how, as we've moved away from communal living and sort of into nuclear environments, and as our societies have become more stratified with housing costs determining where you live rather than the community that you grew up in or whatever else it is, people don't live near their parents at anywhere near the same rate and don't live near their friends at anywhere near the same rate. And that means that it's much more isolating to do. That's a complaint that you hear a lot, particularly from new mothers, because they're often the ones who take the leave and are at home on their own. And if you don't do it at the same time as your friends, which is likely, then it can be pretty isolating to have to walk around on your own and look for stuff to do. I'm someone, when I was in Canberra, I kept my own hours and was often struck how many places I would go and you would only see women running with prams, like at the lake during the day, for example, or at parks or whatever. There wouldn't be anybody else that was out. And it just seems like an odd use of a society, particularly when Canberra's so good during the day when the sun's out and so cold when it's gone. And everybody's inside for the sunny bit, can choose their own time when it's freezing. It seems like we're stuffed up somewhere. But I think very much in retrospect, this will also seem like a big stuff up. We don't do child rearing. If I was to think about all the hardships that I have in a given week, most of them surround not being able to have a couple hours here and there to do a couple tasks or to sleep a bit more or to do some exercise or whatever it is on the days that are particularly stretched. And that's because Lily and I made the choice to move away from all of our support networks and we live without family and are doing this on our own. But even still, because of how diffused we are contemporarily anyway, it wasn't really obvious where in Australia we would go. Her parents are in Sydney, my mum's in Noosa, my dad's in Perth, my sister's in Lisbon, her brother's in Melbourne. There isn't that same community core that people have had historically to lean on. And I know that people do that and that you can build it, but I think in many instances you have to push uphill and actively work towards it, whereas that's something that would have been taken for granted by every generation of every single human till maybe 50, 100 years ago. One of the plus sides of modern living, though, is that you're not enslaved to that network for accessing good information. You're not dependent upon just what your neighbor thinks to find out about something. If anything's difficult, there's the universe at your fingertips, and you can look up, whether something is safe to eat at a particular age, or what to do with certain behavioral issue, or whatever. Or even just finding other people. You can post into a community group and find like-minded people for a play date or what have you. So there are huge and real benefits that offset much of the worst of all those issues that I mentioned. But one of the main shifts, and I possibly should have said this earlier, is the physical and mental transformations that you go through doing it. I don't think enough is made out of this, but particularly for men. For women, obviously, have a huge physical transformation. For me, an unimaginable Olympus to climb, and the most impressive thing that I've ever been a party to. But it's something of that magnitude is so visible and obvious. But also men, you undergo a big physical change. It's not as dramatic, but it has its impact. One of them is you have a really reduced testosterone. If you're around babies or young kids as a man, you have reduced testosterone, which is designed to curb aggressive male behavior and to stop you going out seeking other sexual partners and things like that. But that's where you get your dad bod thing, because you store fat more quickly, which I think is to help you with the sleep deprivation. I don't know, like the amount of sleep that I get in a week would be half what I had 4 years ago, and I wouldn't have been able to survive it at all 4 years ago, and I don't even really notice it now. It's probably just because it's the water I swim in and I'm accustomed to it, but it doesn't bother me. Like last night, I went to sleep at midnight. I woke up every single hour until 5:30 when I woke up for good. I'm a little sleepy, but it doesn't bother me. I feel relatively normal, which I think is part of that physical transformation. Obviously, your brain also massively rewires to be oriented to do all those things that if you're not a parent seem like are insane, like to love a kid, to be like, oh, they're such a genius when they burp. Also, that amygdala grows to be anxious when you see something that could be a threat to them. Those are also pretty striking changes. But from someone within them, like the only really noticeable one that I really feel every day, how great it is to love them. Like it's so rewarding. I mean, I've told a couple friends this, but just to feel their skin or like give them a hug is like, it's euphoric. It's insane. Getting to see the world through their eyes is so special. It's cliche to say, but it's like learning everything again for the first time. You get to see things with wonder, move through the world as they do, which is nice. It also demands that you unlearn a bunch of your assumptions to be able to access that beginner point again. And hopefully you're doing it with someone that you really like, or even, dare I say, love. And you get the incredible experience of seeing what a combination of you and this person that you really care about is in the world. It oddly reflects back and teaches you a lot about how you react to things, how you see the world, and also how your partner does. Getting a random mix of that thrown up is magical. Kind of no other way to put it. And I've had the thought enter my head a couple of times, like just imagining different scenarios where there'll be a threat to them. And if in that scenario, I have to die to save their life, that feels good to me. Like there's no question at all. I'm like, oh yes, it's not even just like a, yes, on balance, I'd make that decision. It actually, which is actually kind of frighteningly, it feels good. I'm like, yes, that is how things must be. And that's a rewiring because I never considered that at all before. I never considered dying for any cause before. I still intend to live till I'm 600 or whatever. I mean, I got too many podcast episodes to make. Another major lesson I've learned from parenting is one that I already suspected, but this has really been hammered home in the specifics of this domain, which is everyone is so completely different. And it's so important to account for that in how you make decisions. I see a lot of people, friends through the kids' park and whatever, become quite anxious around their kids doing certain behaviors that other kids aren't doing, or seeing how other people are parenting and feeling a need to adopt that stuff. And it's just so striking how much, to me, by my value set, that stuff just isn't important. And I think it's because we don't have a good mapping of how different we are as adults. And we should, because, you think of the person you like the least on the planet, their motivations and behavior are probably at the very least alienating, if not repulsive to you. But, that would go in both directions. We're a pretty diverse bunch of people. That's not all nurture. Like that exists at the childhood level as well, that range of differences. And so much as I wouldn't want to tell you how to manage relationships in your own life in the way that I do myself, it's exactly the same with kids. I think that you can save yourself a lot of stress by not needing your kid to be performing at the level of every other kid or behaving in the same way or whatever it might be. because we're all so different. Some people will never get to some things. In fact, this is a thought that came up a lot when I was doing the eugenics episode last week, because somebody commented under my YouTube channel. Go over there and follow me immediately if you don't already. You get to look at my face. And they said, well, it's all well and good to be against eugenics, but what are we going to do about the 700,000 autistic people in Australia? And I thought it's so interesting how we seem to need a particular type of value and function for people, for them to be legitimate in society. I suspect it's a monkey brain thing where we just want people to be as similar to us as possible, or at least as capable as us, in order for us to feel safe in the tribe or something like that. The thought of how many people are aborting people with disabilities that they could survive perfectly happy lives with, because they are not maximized in the same way as someone who might become an accountant or whatever, is really quite a confronting thing to think about. Because I mean, like, I love all of my friends very much, should go without saying. But if I were to think about them, if they didn't exist, is the human project being advanced through its frontiers? Like, that's almost everybody on the whole planet. Like, to deny the validity for certain people to live basically exclusively because of their professional virtue in an economy that I think a strong percentage of people acknowledge is insane anyway, is a madness, and it's a tough conversation to have. Anyway, in exactly the same spirit, I think a lot of people could be relieved of a lot of unnecessary stress in realizing that everyone's different. And if your kid isn't rolling at 6 months, they're rolling at 9 months. It's, your life's not over. If they don't speak until they're 3, what of it? If they don't speak until they're 10, if they don't speak at all, like, there's just so many different valid human lives and beautiful ways of being in the world. And being a parent and having lots of proximity to kids is a really nice way of realizing that, because you see how much of that diversity isn't just from culture or educational values. It's just something that's split across us from the very start, which is exciting and is something to celebrate. A common refrain for new parents is that the things that they used to want, they no longer want anymore, because they just want good things for their kids, or they want to spend time as a family. And I haven't really been struck by that. And I don't think it's because I haven't been rewired to really want to care about kids and family and that stuff. That certainly feels true. But I suspect it's because I wasn't really holding particularly tightly onto wanting specific things for myself anyway. There are things I would really like to do, and those all remain broadly the same. I think where you do hear that, it's probably a product of that stress testing where you only have so much time and resources. So you really do have to radically reprioritize if you strictly want to be doing things. If you want to be winning tennis grand slams, then you can do that with kids, but you need to have a lot of support and you need to have everything in order. You can't win the tennis grand slams, be a good parent, and open a little restaurant downstairs from where you live. Like, there's only so many things you can do in life. And I think that while there are those changes, I don't feel like a fundamentally different person. I still think my values are broadly the same. I think my interests are broadly the same. I can see very much how, if you were misaligned in something in your life, again, that haptic feedback that's going to come in much quicker and stress test the decisions that you've made and the things that you think that are maybe not optimal for you or considered are going to come back hard. Like, I think you see a lot of people who work jobs just because they like to be good at something, and they get the good feedback at the job and keep doing the job. And then they have kids and they're like, oh God, I realized I don't care about the job. Maybe you never did anyway. You just didn't have time to interrogate that. And now you do have to interrogate it. I think that's something you see a bit. And I would also say that in exactly the same way, where people have a really tough time in the first couple of years, which are really hard, there's no doubt about that. But where people have an extra tough time seems to be where you're unable to re-gear away from the things that you don't value, or you don't have the capacity to listen to the feedback, and you're trapped into obligations that you made before. I mean, even the stereotypical things that you sort of see in TV and movie depictions of people having kids and suffering, it'll be a baby crying in a queue, or it'll be having to quickly put clothes on a toddler and get them out the door and into the car, and they're not cooperating. Like, all these things. They're scenarios that I don't find myself in too much, because I'm lucky to be able to be doing this type of stuff, which is a little bit more flexible in its time. And also, I don't really have to suffer the pain of leaving the kids too regularly, which is something that a lot of people, particularly mothers, complain about. And I imagine is really tough. Actually, the times in which I find it toughest, other than all the tasks and things that you have to do, is when you have to code switch quickly between things. Say if I have to send an email and I'm getting tickle attacked and whatever else. It's fine, but there's something about having to hold on to needing to get a particular task done, or in an environment that's, particularly if you're a breastfeeding mother, everything in the environment is geared towards you not being able to do that well. You kind of couldn't design a more adverse environment than, someone very important to you, urgently needing your time at a constant but still somehow unpredictable interval. Like that's how you would stop someone from being effective at work. You would put a speaker in their ear that just went off intermittently. And also you really, really cared about the sound and you were really, really invested more than anything else in the consequences of what was making that sound. If you're in that environment and then also being really wedded to be able to get particular work outcomes or social outcomes or friendship, like whatever it might be, you're on a road to stress and something's going to collapse at some point. So yes, that's just a collection of my opinions about parenting. I'll probably come back to the topic with some extra reflections from my patrons. So thank you so much. If you do want to join up, there is a free tier. Head on to patreon.com/Endry, ENDREY. I hope that this was a more fun episode to get the taste of eugenics out of our mouths, so to speak. And I'll be back next week with more. Head on over. You can participate. It's not too late. The poll's still live. The current leading one is, I think Germany's in big trouble, which I do. But I'm a bit afraid to talk about it. So if you want to vote for another topic, go nuts. In the meantime, thanks so much for joining me, and I hope you have a lovely week.